Hey guys, tonight we step into the thick air of a medieval tavern where the ale is warm, the floor is muddy, and there's a 50-50 chance someone's arm wrestling a pig. Picture yourself shouldering open a warped wooden door, the kind with iron hinges that creak like a dying goose, and immediately being hit with the sharp tang of sour beer and unwashed bodies. The air hangs heavy with smoke, laughter curses, and the muffled thump of someone falling off a bench. A lute twangs somewhere in the background, but it's mostly drowned out by the clatter of dice on a table and the crackle of a hearth fire if you're lucky enough to find one still burning. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in the doorway a moment too long, and someone throws a chicken bone at your foot. This is not a place where people pause politely. You shuffle inside quickly, sidestepping a muddy dog gnawing on something that looks suspiciously like a boot. The floor is straw scattered, but somehow still slick. Best not to ask with what. You're in a 14th century English tavern, though you could just as easily be in a French estaminet or a German Weinstube. The basics are the same: wooden beams, low ceilings, warped tables, and patrons more interested in what's in their cup than what century they're in. The tavern keeper eyes you from behind a cracked mug. She's wiry in her 60s, with an expression that suggests she's seen 3 plagues and at least 1 demon. The look she gives you is not unfriendly, it's just the standard don't cause trouble glare. Behind her barrels line the wall, one of which is currently leaking. A boy, no older than 12, hastily stuffs a rag into it and then disappears into the back. Child labor check. Likely illegal tavern operation. Also check. You hear snippets of conversation as you squeeze deeper inside. One man is loudly explaining how he once jousted a bishop. Another claims he has Roman ancestry, which is either wildly untrue or extremely boring. Someone else is arguing with the fireplace. The furniture is mismatched, with some tables seemingly salvaged from collapsed chapels. You spot a carved angel on one leg, supporting a tankard of ale, and a man slumped over it. Taverns weren't just watering holes, they were communal hubs. If you were a traveler, this was where you learned who ruled the local manor, which roads were impassable, and whether wolves had been sighted lately. If you were a local, it was where you forgot you lived in a time before indoor plumbing. One thing's for sure, the tavern doesn't sleep. It simmers. And you, poor soul, have just wandered into the stew. You push farther into the tavern, stepping over a limp cat that may or may not be sleeping, and begin your search for somewhere anywhere to sit. This isn't as simple as finding an empty chair. First chairs are a luxury. You're more likely to find a low stool or a rough bench splintered from years of elbows and behinds. Second, the rules of tavern seating are unwritten, unspoken, and enforced with staggering enthusiasm. You spot a space beside a fire, but an old man beats you to it by swinging his cane and cackling like a banshee. Eventually, you squeeze between a toothless merchant and a cloaked woman peeling onions. The bench wobbles like it's had too much ale, and you're not sure if what you're sitting on is straw or something straw-like that used to be food. The table is sticky in ways that defy chemistry. Still, it's yours temporarily. Your benchmates don't acknowledge you beyond a grunt. but you're in good company. A jug of cloudy ale sits in the center of the table, from which people drink freely, wiping the rim only if someone nearby sneezes. You're offered a sip. This is a test. Decline and you risk offense. Accept, and you may be drinking something fermented in a boot. You go for it. It's an experience. Warm, flat, slightly sour, and not unlike licking a wooden spoon dipped in vinegar. But it's safe enough. Probably. Nearby, a gaggle of geese flutters underfoot, herded by a barefoot child wearing a shirt far too large for him. The geese are either pets' livestock or uninvited guests, no one seems sure. One hops onto the bench next to you and stares with alarming intelligence. You stare back. It wins. Taverns weren't neatly segregated by class. You might find yourself next to a noble slumming it, or a peasant who spent his last coin on cheap wine. The seating arrangement often said more about how fast you moved and how sharp your elbows were than your social rank. In fact, seating was political. Sit too close to the fire, and you risk accusations of arrogance. Too close to the door, and you might be mistaken for staff. And the staff, well, they're a busy lot. A girl no older than 14 rushes by, balancing trenchers stacked high with something brown and steaming. The scent is heavy with onions grease and distant despair. She bumps your shoulder without apology and disappears behind a curtain that serves as the kitchen wall. A man across the room starts playing a bone flute, yes, bone, and the room grows quieter for a moment, as if judging his musical choice. Then someone starts clapping offbeat, and the noise resumes with twice the volume. A dog joins in with a howl. You're now officially part of the scene, like a daub of paint in a chaotic fresco. You've found a seat, even if it's covered in chicken feathers. You've earned a spot in this strange, smelly, roaring mosaic of medieval nightlife. Just don't leave it unattended. Someone else might claim it while you're relieving yourself behind the shed. That is, if you can find the shed. You've barely settled into your precarious seat when the tavern keeper descends upon your table like a hawk with sore feet. She doesn't say a word. At first, just stands there with her arms crossed, surveying the group like a schoolmaster catching someone mid-blasphemy. Finally, she barks, "You paying or just breathing up my heat?" This is your introduction to tavern law. Tavern keepers in the Middle Ages weren't just glorified bartenders. They were local institutions, part chef, part landlord, part sheriff, and full-time chaos managers. Your host tonight wears a frayed woolen apron, stained with the kind of blotches that suggest long-forgotten stews, or possibly blood. Her hair is bound in a linen cap, her voice rough from years of smoke and shouting. Her name might be Agnes, or Maud, or possibly just Oyu. She doesn't write anything down. That's because she remembers everything. Who's paid? Who still owes? Who started that fight with the pig handler last Whitsunday? Who flirted with her niece? Debt here is not recorded on parchment. It's carried in scowls and suspiciously light ale jugs. The rules of the tavern are not posted anywhere, but you learn them quickly. First, no fighting unless the tavern keeper says it's entertaining. Second, if you spill ale, you clean it, or at least cover it with straw. Third, keep your hands to yourself unless invited otherwise, and even then expect a slap. Fourth, don't ask what's in the stew, just don't. Break any of these, and the consequences vary. Light infractions might earn you a boot to the shin. Serious offenses. Out the door face first and into the cold, if you're lucky. Some keepers kept cudgels under the bar, lovingly named Old Persuader, the Reminder, or Margaret. You watch her slap a drunk's hand away from the tap like she's batting at flies. He grumbles and slinks off toward the hearth, muttering about injustice. She gives your table one last look and then moves on her authority absolute. Historians still argue whether women dominated the tavern trade by choice or necessity, but it's clear they ruled the floor. In many cities, alewives ran the business, brewing, serving, disciplining. Some even gained reputations for quality drink, which might seem unremarkable until you consider that most ale went sour within days, and sanitation was more a suggestion than a practice. There were regulations too. Cities and villages imposed curfews, quality inspections, and price caps. But these were more like guidelines enforced only when it suited the local officials, who coincidentally often drank free. You see a parchment nailed by the hearth listing fines 3 pence, for swearing 5, for fighting 10, for vomiting in the barrel room. Most of the ink is faded, and someone's drawn a mustache on the local Reeves sketch. It's hard not to admire the tavern keeper. She's part entrepreneur, part peacekeeper, and all survivor. In a world of plague, famine, and bad poetry, she holds together the only place where people can forget how miserable life is for a little while anyway. And as you sip your suspicious ale, now slightly warmed by the fire, you realize that she's not just running a tavern. She's running a tightrope act, juggling debts, drunks, and the ever-present threat of a riot, all with a scowl and a ladle. You finally build up the courage to approach the bar, or what passes for one. It's really just a plank of wood balanced on 2 barrels, slick with years of spills, and something vaguely sticky. Behind it, the tavern keeper eyes you, with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for tax collectors and people who ask too many questions. You clear your throat. "Oh, please." She squints. "Coin first." Fair enough. You fumble in your pouch for a few coppers, trying not to show the 1 silver piece you were saving for lodging. With a grunt, she takes the coins and slaps down a wooden cup that smells like it's never been washed. She pours from a ceramic jug, no barrel tap in sight, and the liquid that splashes in is cloudy, slightly brown, and lukewarm. Welcome to medieval beverage service. Ale in the Middle Ages was not your modern craft-brewed IPA. It was more of a survival drink, mildly alcoholic, often flavored with herbs or whatever was at hand, nettle, rosemary, maybe a twig. It was brewed quickly, meant to be consumed even quicker, and occasionally doubled as a broth base or bread starter. Women, especially alewives, were the main brewers in many towns. They'd hang a broomstick, literally a broom, over the door to signal ale for sale. Some brewed in their kitchens, others in small outbuildings that looked like they were held together by prayers and damp hope. The taste, well, it varied. Some batches were sharp and lively. Others had the charm of vinegar mixed with regret. You take a sip. This one's drinkable. There's a hint of something floral, maybe heather or old sock. It warms your chest and numbs your teeth slightly. Not bad. But there are risks. Spoiled ale was common. Poor sanitation, reused barrels, inconsistent. Fermentation all added up to a liquid lottery. Too flat, and it was useless. Too strong, and it could cause hallucinations. Occasionally, brewers cut corners with ingredients like bark or even chalk, to thicken the brew. There are records of people falling ill or worse from dodgy batches. Historians still argue whether those poisonings were accidental or competitive sabotage. To make matters trickier, ale wasn't taxed the same as wine, making it the drink of the working class. Wine, on the rare occasion it showed up in a tavern like this, was watered down to stretch it, and mulled with spices if you were lucky enough to be in a richer district. Here, though, ale reigns supreme, and it's ale you'll drink unless you fancy the suspicious goat's milk being offered by a one-eyed man in the corner. Suddenly, a bellow erupts from the far end of the room. Someone has claimed their ale tastes like boiled shoe. The tavern keeper marches over, dunks a mug into a new barrel, and hands it to him without a word. He takes a sip and immediately stops complaining. Either it's better, or she just intimidated the flavor back into it. You watch another customer at the bar. A monk of some sort requests something with honey. She raises an eyebrow and mutters, "Think you're in a monastery?" But she pulls out a little clay pot and drizzles some in. The monk tips her generously. This tells you a valuable lesson. Asking nicely might cost you more, but it yields results. Then there's the darker side, sometimes literally, of tavern drink. Some cups came laced with sleeping herbs, either by design or by someone looking to rob the drinker. Mugging by mug, so to speak. That's why many patrons bring their own cups and keep their drink close. The man beside you has a pewter tankard with a lid, fancy and paranoid. Still, despite the risks, the ale here is safer than the water. It's been boiled in brewing at least, and it gives the illusion of comfort, of warmth in the belly, and forgetfulness in the mind. For many, it was the only escape they could afford. You raise your cup again and take another sip. It still tastes like floorboard and fennel, but now it's your floorboard and fennel. Your stomach growls audibly enough that the goose under the table looks alarmed. The tavern keeper gives you a knowing glance and disappears into the back. When she returns, it's with a trencher, essentially a slab of stale bread, used as a plate piled with something steaming lumpy and questionably beige. You're handed a wooden spoon and a thin smile that might just be sympathy. Tonight's dinner is a medieval classic peas pudding, thick as mortar and only marginally more flavorful. Beside it lies a curl of boiled eel still gleaming with its natural oils. You poke it with your spoon. It jiggles ominously. This was standard tavern fare, not fancy but filling. In a time when kitchens were small ingredients, seasonal, and spices, expensive taverns relied on what could be prepared in bulk and required minimal skill. Peas, beans, grains, onions, and preserved meats ruled the plate. If it could stew, it made the menu. You glance at the table across the room where someone's being served a pie. It smells decent until the man cuts it open and a suspicious gray steam rises. "Fish," he mutters, then pauses. "I think." Medieval pies could be elaborate or deadly. Bakers sometimes reuse the crust known as a coffin from pie to pie. That's right, reused. Like hand-me-downs, but flakier and potentially full of last week's squirrel. Some pies were filled with surprises, like boiled eggs, mushrooms, or even live birds, if you were at a noble feast. Here, you're hoping there's no surprise at all. Your neighbor, a wiry man with an impressive collection of nose hairs, leans over and whispers, "Best not eat the stew if it smells like ink." Happened once. Cook mistook lampblack for pepper. He cackles and returns to gnawing on a crust of rye bread that could double as a roofing tile. Food regulation was inconsistent, Authorities occasionally inspected taverns for spoiled food or dishonest waits, but more often they simply issued fines and moved on. Some cities required publicans to hang signs listing prices. Others didn't care, as long as the town reeve got his share. Historians still debate how common food poisoning was in everyday medieval life. Some records suggest constant outbreaks of digestive woes. Others imply a general gut-iron constitution among the populace. Either way, you chew cautiously, not entirely trusting the eel's smile. But then surprise, a serving girl slides a tiny dish in front of you. It's filled with something sweet and sticky, a fig pudding, likely made with leftover grains, honey, and dried fruit, a treat for paying customers, or maybe just today's surplus. Either way, it lifts your spirits. Food, for all its hazards, was one of the tavern's main draws. For many travelers, it was their only hot meal for days. For locals, it was cheaper than maintaining a home hearth. And sometimes, if the cook had a good day, or the nearby abbey offloaded some charity loaves, you might even get something approaching delicious. A drunk 2 tables over starts singing a ballad about a pork pie that stole his heart, literally apparently, and the room bursts into laughter. You manage another bite of eel, pretending it's something else entirely. Maybe fish, or hope. You sip your ale again, grateful that it dulls your taste buds. The pudding isn't bad, though. Not bad at all. Maybe tomorrow you'll try the barley stew, or maybe not. It depends on whether you see any smoke rising from the kitchen. Good meals rarely involve fire here. Somewhere behind you, a crash of crockery signals the beginning of tonight's entertainment, or possibly just another clumsy serving boy. Either way, heads turn, conversations pause, and a man on a stool clears his throat dramatically. He wears a battered hat with a feather that's seen better centuries and brandishes a lute with 2 strings too few. With a sweeping gesture and a hiccup, he begins to sing a ballad about a lovesick cobbler and a turnip that betrayed him. Its bawdy, off-key, and absolutely captivating. Welcome to the nightly performance. Taverns weren't just for drinking, they were theaters of the absurd. If you were lucky, you got a minstrel or storyteller, someone who knew 3 chords and half a dozen filthy rhymes. If you were really lucky, you got jugglers, tumblers, or traveling actors performing morality plays in the corner between the firewood stack and the chamber pot. Tonight, however, it's a mix. After the singing, cobbler departs mid-verse, chased off by a flying bread roll. A boy barely old enough to shave begins juggling wooden spoons. He nearly drops one into the eel pot, but recovers just in time to earn a spattering of polite claps and one enthusiastic "aye" from the man in the corner, wearing his hat backwards. And then comes the main event, bear baiting. Or at least a crude imitation of it. From a side room, a small cage is wheeled out. Inside is not a bear, thankfully, but a dog in a ragged cloak and a wooden bear mask strapped to its face. The bear barks once and promptly sits down. A cheer goes up anyway. 2 men with sticks attempt a mock fight, swinging wildly while trying not to actually hit each other or the dog. The crowd loves it. Someone throws a coin. Someone else throws a sausage. Historians still argue whether these events were meant to entertain or distract. Likely both. Life in the Middle Ages was brutish, short, and often dull. A tavern show, no matter how absurd, offered escape. Sometimes, local clergy would protest. wickedness under the roof of ale they'd cry. And yet these same clergy were occasionally seen in the back sipping wine and clapping when the fire eater lit his beard on accident. You spot a monk, now sitting quietly with his hood up. He's watching the scene with what might be a smile. Or indigestion. Hard to tell. The woman next to you begins humming a tune and tapping the table. You join in without realizing. This is how these things go. The tavern becomes a single organism pulsing with laughter song and the occasional belch. Even the tavern keeper allows herself a half smile before throwing a tankard at the juggler when he drops a spoon into someone's lap. You lean back carefully so as not to fall off the uneven bench and let it all wash over you. The loot, the laughter, the ridiculous dog bear. It's chaotic, ridiculous, and weirdly comforting. You're no longer a stranger. You're part of the nightly madness. Just be ready. Because sometimes the next act isn't a jester, it's a monk with opinions. Just as you're beginning to think you've seen the full cast of tavern characters, the door creaks open again, and in steps a man wearing what appears to be half a suit of armor. Just the breastplate, and one pauldron, the rest replaced by mismatched linen and mud. He holds his chin high and announces to no one in particular, Sir Cedric of, Canterbury is here. No one flinches. A drunk near the fire murmurs, that makes 5 this week, and rolls over. Taverns, you quickly learn, are magnets for oddballs and outcasts. They're also crossroads where all manner of souls collide in search of food, drink news, or a place to not be murdered. Tonight's crowd is a vivid cross-section of medieval society, and every face tells a story, or a lie. At your own table now sits a pair of sailors, clearly fresh from a river port. One's missing most of his teeth, the other's missing most of his shirt. They argue in slurred Breton about whether the stars are angels or just holes in the skycloth. Next to them, a pilgrim in a faded scallop shell hood gently counts his rosary with one hand and picks at a bowl of gruel with the other. He says little, but occasionally breaks into spontaneous Latin, startling the goose under the bench. In the corner, a woman with a lute and a dagger tucked in her boot seems to be watching everyone while pretending to drink. She might be a bard. She might also be an informant. Either way, she hasn't blinked in several minutes. Then there's the man claiming to be a knight. He begins telling a tale about slaying a boar with his bare hands when someone, perhaps the tavern keeper, shouts from the kitchen, "You still owe me from last month, Cedric." He turns pink and adjusts his dented helm. Taverns were equalizers of sorts. Nobility might dine elsewhere, but younger sons, disgraced squires, or curious clerics often found their way into establishments like this. The anonymity was part of the charm. No one knew who you were unless you told them. Even then, no one really believed you. A thin woman with a basket of herbs passes by, offering to sell tonics for head pain, heartache, or general man stupidity. She's not joking. A farmer buys a vial and immediately drinks it. He doesn't blink for a full minute afterward. Historians still argue how mixed tavern crowds really were. Some sources suggest inns and alehouses catered to specific classes. Others hint at remarkable mingling, especially in cities' ports and pilgrimage hubs. This tavern feels like a Noah's Ark of misfits, each clinging to their own soggy reason for being here. One man barefoot and wearing a heavy fur cloak despite the warmth tells you he's returning from a vision quest. You ask where he went. 2 valleys over, he says. But I saw a fox dance, and now I understand love. Fair enough. You're learning to nod and smile. Everyone here has a tale, and most aren't looking for truth. They're looking for listeners, or at least someone who won't steal their bread. Your table's getting louder now. The sailor is trying to arm wrestle the pilgrim. The fake knight is gesturing wildly, his ale sloshing with every word. You settle back, letting the noise surround you like a warm, chaotic blanket. You still don't know anyone's name, but somehow they've all become part of your evening. And maybe in this strange stew of humanity, that's enough. The moment you begin to relax, it hits you again, the smell. You'd been adjusting slowly, growing nose blind, like a frog in a stew pot of stench. But now that someone's opened the back door and let in a fresh breeze, the contrast is overwhelming. The tavern air is a dense fog of life's least glamorous aromas. Start with wood smoke, not the nostalgic kind from storybooks. This is scratchy, eye-stinging smoke from damp firewood and a chimney that hasn't seen a sweep in years. The fire crackles in the hearth, but the draft is poor, and the smoke often drifts sideways into the room. It clings to hair fabric and lungs. Layered atop that is sweat, ancient, evolving sweat. Not just from bodies, but from clothing that hasn't been washed since Candlemas. Everyone wears wool, and wool remembers. It holds scents like old feuds. People perspire, dogs pant, and the air grows thicker with every raised tankard. Then there's the ale yeasty sour fermenting in open barrels that seem more biological than mechanical. If you breathe too deeply near the bar, your nostrils might pickle. Under the tables, geese flap and honk, leaving reminders on the floor. A dog scratches itself loudly, then sneezes. A rat darts across the hearthstones. No one reacts. These are just local residents, sharing the space like any other patrons. Someone burns a bit of rosemary near the window. A feeble attempt at purification. It masks nothing. If anything, it adds a medicinal tang that makes the beer smell like illness. And then, sweet relief, a platter of roasted onions and meat scraps passes by. For a moment, everything else is forgotten. The food has its own funk, but at least it promises calories and warmth. You inhale hopefully. It helps. Briefly, people didn't bathe often, not because they were lazy, but because hot water was precious privacy, rare, and doctors still debated whether too much cleanliness was dangerous to your humors. Instead, people relied on linen shifts, herbs, and fatalism. You shift on your bench and notice your own scent, rising a bit of travel dust, a lot of sweat, and the faintly metallic tang of fear from earlier when the dog bear lunged in your direction. You hope no one notices. Then again, they probably assume it's just the table again. Historians still debate whether medieval folk truly stank as much as we think. Some argue that nose sensitivity dulled over time. Others suggest they simply lived in a different olfactory world, a society where your smell said as much about your status as your shoes. Perfume existed especially in noble circles. But here, you're more likely to smell boiled leeks than rosewater. One woman near the door is chewing cloves, not for flavor, but to sweeten her breath. She offers you one. You accept. It helps, but now your mouth burns slightly and tastes like spiced wood. Somehow, though, the smell becomes part of the ambiance, like a smoky tavern in an old detective movie. It's offensive, yes, but also immersive. You're living it, breathing it, becoming one with it. And once your nose gives up the fight, everything settles again into the background. Hum laughter, shouting the flicker of firelight, and yes, the rich historic bouquet of medieval human soup. A cheer erupts from the back of the tavern, not the kind of cheer reserved for heroic deeds or miraculous survivals. This one's sharper, more chaotic, and unmistakably fueled by coin. You crane your neck and spot the cause. A group huddled around a crude wooden table. Flailing cups, wobbling dangerously close to the edge. Dice scatter across the table's grooves, some bouncing onto the floor and vanishing forever. One man claps so hard he topples backward into a rack of cloaks. No one helps him up. Welcome to the gaming den. Every respectable medieval tavern, and many disreputable ones, had a corner where fortunes were made, lies were spun, and friendships died quietly. Dice games were king. Easy to carry, easier to cheat. The most popular hazard, a game of chance and daring where you declare a number and then roll the bones, hoping the gods of misfortune look the other way. You shuffle closer, pretending to look for your goose. The players don't notice. Their eyes are glued to the table, watching the dice tumble like tiny knuckle bones of destiny, which in fact they originally were. Before dice became neat cubes, people used animal bones. Some still do. The man at the center, red-faced and sweating, throws with the solemnity of a priest. The result, gasps. Someone curses in Norman French. Coins change hands. A tankard is knocked over, and no one moves to save it. You spot the monk from earlier, sidling into the crowd. At first glance, he appears uninterested, but then he produces his own set of dice, tied with a leather string, and begins playing with them one-handed like a seasoned rogue. Monks weren't supposed to gamble, but then again, monks weren't supposed to be here at all. Cheating is a given. Weighted dice sleight of hand, distracting the other player with a suggestive goose, any method to edge out a win. There's a man with suspiciously lucky rolls and sleeves, too loose to be honest. Another uses words like double six, even before the dice stop rolling. Historians still argue whether gambling was tolerated or quietly encouraged. Officially, many towns outlawed it. Unofficially, the tavern keeper often got a cut. Some cities even issued licenses for gaming tables. It was business after all. Back at your own table, the sailor with the missing shirt is teaching the pilgrim a card game with only 19 cards. Lost the rest in Rouen, he explains. You have no idea how the game works, but they seem to be betting with dried beans and something that might be a tooth. The woman with the dagger loot combo sidles past you and slips a coin into the hand of the man with the rigged dice. She doesn't stay to watch the outcome. Curious, you're offered a chance to play. A man with a lazy eye and an eager grin pats the seat beside him. Only a penny, he says. Winner takes half the pot. Tavern keeper takes the other half. You decline, citing poor luck and a wounded wrist. The man shrugs and moves on to a boy balancing a stack of cups. The game continues. Someone sings a nonsense chant. Someone else throws up in a boot and then tries to bet with it. There's laughter, shouting, and the unmistakable crack of someone being accused of cheating. A scuffle breaks out, brief and unimpressive. It ends with a tankard thrown a nose bloodied, and the tavern keeper threatening to shut it all down if one more mug breaks. You lean back again, sipping your now lukewarm ale. The smell of sweat and smoke hasn't faded, but now it carries the spice of risk, tiny wooden cubes that could decide whether you leave tonight, richer, drunker, or with a goose-related injury. And somehow, that feels oddly thrilling. A shriek, half laughter, half alarm, cuts through the murmur of conversation. Heads turn just in time to see a man in a moth-eaten cloak stumble backward red-faced, while a young woman, brandishing a pewter jug, glares at him with righteous fury. "Keep your hands where the saints can see them," she snaps, and the room bursts into hoots and guffaws. Welcome to the tangled mess of tavern romance, or more accurately, tavern trouble. Love in a medieval tavern is rarely gentle. It's loud, impulsive, and often poorly timed. Flirting here involves more elbow jabs than compliments, and a misplaced wink can lead to either a dance or a duel. Tonight, it seems you're in for a bit of both. The woman with the jug tall fierce, and probably used to this, is already halfway back to her seat before her assailant finishes sputtering. His friends are laughing too hard to help. He slinks away, ego bruised more than anything else. 2 tables over a pair is doing the opposite of arguing. They lean close, voices low, hands brushing just enough to be noticed. The girl has daisies braided into her hair, fresh ones, meaning someone braved the chill to find them. Her companion, possibly a baker's apprentice judging by the flower on his tunic, is whispering something that makes her giggle into her sleeve. And yet nothing stirs more passion or violence than a misinterpreted glance. A young man in fine hose is glaring at a merchant's son who keeps smiling at his sister. Tension brews. Someone quietly places bets on who throws the first punch. Historians still argue about the role taverns played in courtship. Some say they were neutral ground, informal and open. Others argue they were too wild, too risky, more likely to inspire scandal than sonnets. But there's no denying that they offered rare freedom, men and women, mingling, talking, teasing. It was an unsupervised social stage. Of course, not everyone's looking for love. The ladies near the back corner are sipping sweetened wine and watching the room like hawks. Their bodices are tight, their expressions looser. One makes eye contact with a traveling mason and tilts her head. He tilts his in return. A silent transaction begins requiring no words. Prostitution, though officially condemned, thrived in taverns. Many inns had side rooms or outbuildings quietly repurposed. Some tavern keepers even partnered with local women, offering protection in exchange for a share. Towns often looked the other way unless someone important got involved. Your own bench shuffles as the sailor suddenly stands and declares his love for all women everywhere. He's met with applause and then immediate distraction when he steps on the goose again. It bites him. The love declaration ends in yelping. Then comes the inevitable. The baker's apprentice, poor flour-dusted fool, places a hand gently on the girl's knee. Her older brother, the one with the loud voice and suspiciously large belt buckle, notices. He stands. The tavern hushes slightly. Just slightly. The tavern keeper sighs. "Not again," she mutters. Before a punch is thrown, she hurls a ladle across the room. It strikes a beam with a satisfying thunk. "Take it outside, or I'm locking the door and charging you for every minute you waste my evening." The brother hesitates. The girl stands too, cheeks red but defiant. "He's just talking," she says. "You do it all the time." This deflates the drama. The brother glares, mutters something about dignity, and returns to his seat. The baker smart lad chooses that moment to go refill his cup. Crisis averted. You glance around. Smirks, winks, flushed faces, romance fleeting and fumbling is everywhere. Some will end in kisses, some in brawls, some in nothing more than memory. And you sip your ale and let the drama swirl around you safely on the edge. As the hour grows late and the candles melt low, the rowdiness begins to thin somewhat. A few patrons stumble toward the door, muttering farewells or vague threats. But others, including you, are staying the night, whether by choice or by circumstance. No horses, no moonlight, no coin for safer shelter. You've decided to brave the upstairs lodging. It's a dubious honor. The tavern keeper points a crooked finger toward a rickety staircase, then mutters something about, "Don't wake the one in the corner." You ascend with care. Each step creaks like it's auditioning for a horror tale, and you're fairly certain the last one shifts under your foot. The upper floor is not a corridor of private rooms. It's a single space broken into vague bed zones by low partitions, hanging cloths, or wishful thinking. The air is thick, even warmer than below, and disturbingly moist. You spot a pile of hay in the corner. It twitches. Best to look away. You're handed a straw-stuffed mattress about the thickness of a stack of pancakes and told to pick a corner. You choose one near a shuttered window, closed tight, yet still letting in a breeze that smells like moss and questionable intentions. Your bedmates, or floormates, really are already half asleep. One is snoring like an asthmatic dragon, another mumbling Latin phrases between gulps of breath. A woman nearby is muttering a lullaby to herself. She's cradling something wrapped in cloth. You don't ask. Privacy here is theoretical. There are no locks, no boundaries, just an understanding that if you take someone's boots, you'd better run fast or fight well. Most patrons sleep in their clothes with their bags as pillows and their belts wrapped around one arm. You lie down, trying to ignore the symphony of coughs, farts, snores, and the occasional laugh from the room below. Your mattress makes a sound like a weasel being stepped on, and something within it shifts. Hopefully straw, possibly rat. Lice are almost a certainty. In fact, you notice a man in the next bed, scratching with methodical precision. He catches your eye grins and says, "Name's Gerald. The lice like me best. You'll be fine." You believe him. You don't know why, but you do. Historians still debate how common shared lodging was in medieval inns and taverns. Some say mixed company was rare. Others insist it was the norm, especially in towns without many guest houses. What is certain is that comfort was not a selling point. Space roof and warmth were all you could hope for. Some taverns offered blanket shares, a literal system where multiple strangers shared a single covering. You'd buy a spot, not a room, and snoring rights came free with admission. Your cloak becomes your blanket, your boots, your pillow, and your pouch, your heartbeat monitor. Every now and then, a floorboard groans or someone chuckles in their sleep. The window rattles gently in its frame. There's no true silence here, but there is something oddly soothing about it. You're not alone in the dark. You're part of a collective snore, a chorus of the weary, the drunk, the hopeful, and the too poor to keep walking. Just as your eyelids start to droop, someone at the far end mutters, "Who took my spoon?" No one replies. It's not your problem. You shift on your mattress, trying to find a spot less lumpy, less crunchy. It's not great, but it's dry, and that's something. Morning has not yet dawned, but the tavern downstairs begins to murmur to life once more. You stir from your questionably restful sleep, stretch carefully to avoid disturbing Gerald or his loyal lice, and gather your belongings. The stairway groans beneath your steps, and as you descend, you realize the tavern has already resumed its role, not as a place of drink and laughter now, but as the very heartbeat of local news and gossip. You spot the tavern keeper stoking the fire wearing the same apron from last night and exactly 0 signs of sleep. A boy, perhaps her son, or just the latest orphan-turned-helper, sweeps the floor lazily, mostly moving dirt from one corner to another. 3 older men sit at a table near the window mugs, steaming in their hands, whispering as if plotting a coup or sharing recipes. One leans over stage whispers. They say the Reeves' wife's sister had a baby with red hair. Red. He taps his mug knowingly. You've stumbled into the medieval version of morning talk radio. Taverns weren't just drinking holes, they were the public square with ale. Messages were passed, agreements made, and reputations shredded with clinical precision. A new face like yours, your news. And already someone's probably wondering if you're a pilgrim, a taxman, or an exiled jester. At a far table, a merchant counts coins while explaining loudly that he'll be buying wool direct from source this year, no more middlemen. His neighbor grunts, unimpressed. That's what you said last Candlemas. Still ended up buying from old Ina and her bald sheep. You order a piece of bread and a cup of thin morning ale. The bread is hard but edible. The ale tastes like it was brewed in a hurry, which it probably was. Still, it warms your stomach and gives you the courage to eavesdrop. Near the hearth, a group of women share news of a local miller who apparently fell into his own wheel. One laughs too hard, and the tavern keeper scolds, "Don't joke till we know if he's still got his arms." Historians still debate the reliability of tavern gossip as a historical source. Some call it noise. Others call it community memory. Whatever the case you're hearing, updates faster than any town crier could manage. You also notice a man with an ink-stained hand scribbling furiously in a small ledger. Could be a clerk, could be a spy. He doesn't look up, and there, in the corner, is the local bailiff. Not in uniform, of course, but his belt buckle is too clean and his boots too quiet. He's sipping wine at this hour, which marks him clearly as someone important. He listens more than he speaks, nodding occasionally. You wonder how many arguments were settled or started based on what he hears here. A rooster crows outside, but inside the real morning has begun a burst of laughter over a rumor. Someone arguing about bread prices, a traveling weaver mapping out road conditions with crumbs. The tavern becomes a medieval newsroom where headlines are shouted and retracted within the same breath. You lean back, warming your hands near the fire, and take it all in. You may not live here, but for this moment, you're part of the web, listening, observing, maybe even adding a whisper of your own. About the man who claimed to be a knight, about the dog in a bear mask, about the monk who cheated at dice. And just like that, your story joins the tavern's endless murmur. The morning hum is briefly silenced by a loud thunk at the door. A parchment roughly nailed to the wooden frame flaps in the wind. The tavern keeper eyes it without moving. "More sins, I suppose," she mutters, reaching for her broom. You walk over and scan the message. It's a sermon notice on the moral rot of alehouses scheduled for Sunday outside St. Balthazar's. The usual fire and brimstone warning about what happens to souls soaked in ale and soaked further in sin. A crude drawing at the bottom shows a man with horns being pulled into hell by a giant tankard. Someone has already drawn a mustache on him. This is hardly the first such warning. Medieval taverns lived in uneasy truce with the church. Priests railed against them from pulpits, accusing them of harboring idleness, lust, and worse card games. Town criers repeated the same messages on street corners. Taverns are dens of temptation, they'd shout. Resist the brewer's lies. Inside the brewer's lies are warm, delicious, and paired with stew. You sit back down and ask the tavern keeper whether she worries about it. She laughs once, then spits in the fire. "Let them preach," she says. "Even friars sneak in after dark for a cup and a cuddle." Indeed, some of the fiercest critics of taverns were also frequent visitors, albeit in disguise. Clerics, monks, even bishops occasionally showed up hooded and humble, partaking in the very behaviors they denounced. One such figure enters just then. He's wearing travel-stained robes, a heavy crucifix, and the unmistakable look of a man trying not to be recognized. The tavern keeper doesn't miss a beat. "Wine, Father?" she asks sweetly. He nods without speaking. The tension between sacred and profane was real but porous. Moralists condemned the laughter, the dancing, the mingling of genders, yet they couldn't shut it down. Not fully. Life was hard, ale was soft, and the tavern offered something sermons rarely could comfort without judgment. Still, authorities tried. Sumptuary laws limited how much could be spent on food or clothing in taverns. Some towns enforced curfews, bells ringing at dusk to signal no more ale. Punishments for breaking the rules ranged from fines to public shaming. One record even notes a man forced to wear a barrel around town labeled "drunk again." Historians still argue how effective these crackdowns were. Some say taverns adapted going quiet during inspections and rowdy the moment officials left. Others claim there were real consequences. But everyone agrees the attempts never truly stopped the revelry. The tavern keeper grins at the parchment on the door. "If I had a penny for every sermon nailed to that frame, she says I'd own 3 more taverns. And a goose farm." Someone nearby chuckles. "You'd drink your profits, Ina." "Damn right," she replies, pouring herself a generous cup of something amber. You look around. The monk is still scribbling. The sailor from last night is passed out in a chair. The flower girl hums while braiding herbs. And the fire crackles indifferent to both salvation and damnation. Perhaps this is why taverns survived every moral crusade, because they reflected life as it was: messy, noisy, joyful, flawed. A place where no one asked if your soul was spotless, only if you could pay for your ale. And in that way, they were more honest than any sermon. It starts with a loud crash, a bench overturned, followed by shouting, and then the unmistakable thunk of fist meeting face. Again. The tavern erupts. Chairs scrape. Tankards fly. Someone yells, "Not the goose," before a flurry of feathers explodes across the room. It's chaos. Familiar chaos. Welcome to the part of the night every tavern dreads and secretly expects the rowdy spiral, the source. That baker's apprentice, again emboldened by honeyed ale and poor judgment, tried to serenade the herbalist with an off-key tune and a handful of mystery berries. Her response was swift, her slap audible, and now her brother's involved, followed by the brother's friend and then a man who just really wanted an excuse to punch someone. The tavern keeper, to her credit, is already moving. She grabs her ladle, yes, the same one from the stew, and wades into the fray like a battle-hardened general. Outside. Or I'm locking the door and feeding you to my cat. Most comply. A few don't. She deals with them personally. The fight spills into the alley where the crowd gathers. No one really wants to fight, but no one wants to miss it either. Bets are placed. Bread is thrown. One man tries to sell healing salves from a pouch of suspicious herbs. Inside the tavern looks like a battlefield. A bench is splintered. A candle has rolled under a table and is now dangerously close to a spilled flagon, and the goose is heroically guarding a half-eaten pie. Then someone yells, "Fire!" The candle has found straw. Smoke curls, and the mood shifts instantly from rowdy to panicked. The tavern keeper doesn't yell. She bellows, "Water now!" Buckets appear from nowhere. Some filled, some empty, some simply enthusiastic. A line forms, inefficient but passionate. Within moments, the fire is out. The damage minimal. The lesson forgotten by next week. Medieval taverns were notoriously prone to disaster. Fire was common. Open flames, wooden beams, alcohol, and crowds made for a combustible mix. Fights were frequent, especially late at night, when patience ran low and drinks ran high. Historians still argue whether most taverns were safer than the streets or just better lit. But there's little doubt that every keeper had to become part bouncer, part firefighter, part mediator, and sometimes part undertaker. Tonight's damage is manageable. No serious injuries, no permanent scars, just one missing shoe, a broken lute string, and someone's hat now floating in the stew pot. The tavern keeper surveys the scene, shakes her head, and starts cleaning. "That's 3 nights this week," she mutters, "and it's only Thursday." A boy replaces the fallen candle. The dog returns to its favorite spot. The monk continues scribbling, apparently unfazed, and the goose, now wearing a ribbon from someone's cloak, settles beside the hearth as if nothing happened. You sip what's left of your ale and marvel at how quickly it all returns to normal. Medieval taverns were like living creatures, noisy, volatile, and weirdly resilient. They absorbed drama like a sponge and squeezed it out before dawn. Outside, the last echoes of the scuffle fade. Someone cheers, someone limps, someone sings a hymn badly. Inside, the tavern exhales, and so do you. The hour is late, so late in fact, it has circled back around to early. A pale light seeps through the warped shutters, and the last embers in the hearth blink lazily. The tavern is quieter now, not silent, never silent, but hushed, like a forest, just after a storm. You sit alone at your bench, sipping the final dregs of your ale, now lukewarm and mysteriously thicker than it was earlier. Around you, the survivors of the night are dozing, humming, or quietly debating whether they've lost a tooth or just a pebble from the stew. It's time to leave. But leaving a medieval tavern isn't as simple as stepping out. First, you must locate your shoes. They're under the bench or near the hearth, or possibly beneath that goose. You approach carefully, offering a small piece of bread in trade. The goose considers, then waddles off dignified, as if it hadn't terrorized half the guests earlier. Next, you check your pouch. Still. There. Still light. Good. Then your head, aching slightly, eyes bleary, legs functional. You qualify for departure. The tavern keeper nods as you pass. No smile, no farewell, just a look that says you'll be back. And she's probably right. Outside, the street is still damp from last night's rain. The sky glows a sleepy blue. A dog trots past, followed by a cart so creaky it sounds apologetic. A man in a clerical robe stumbles out of the shadows, humming what might be a hymn or a tavern tune. The walk home or wherever you're headed is slow. The air smells better here, but sharper too. Clean, but with hints of manure and smoke. You wrap your cloak tighter and tread carefully, avoiding puddles and the occasional snoring figure curled beneath a cart. You pass a shrine. Someone's left flowers. Someone else has left a sausage. Historians still debate what made the tavern such a central part of medieval life. Was it the drink, the company, the chaos, or just the simple fact that it welcomed everyone willing to part with a coin and a little pride? You reach the edge of town. The fields beyond are dark waiting. Somewhere, a rooster crows, maybe the same one from the stew. You turn back just once to glance at the tavern. The light in the upstairs window flickers out, and in that moment, you realize that while the tavern may not be holy or pure, or even remotely clean, it is alive. It's the heart of the town's messy, wonderful soul. A place where stories ferment, friendships overboil, and memories settle like sediment at the bottom of a tankard. And as the path bends and the wind rises, you smile, because you survived the night. Now, let's slow everything down. The road behind you fades into mist. Each step away from the tavern feels softer, lighter, as though your boots have lost their weight, and the world has turned to wool beneath your feet. The sky, once a hard shell of black, is now softening into pale peach and gray. Dawn's hush is everywhere. The smells of the tavern, smoke, ale hay laughter, still linger in your cloak, but even they are mellowing, fading. A distant scent memory. Your breath steadies. The night's noise has quieted. Your ears rest in the stillness. A bird calls once high and far. Then again, the first song of morning. You pass a hedgerow wet with dew. A spider web glitters in the light like tiny silver threads sewn through the air. Somewhere, in a cottage nearby, a door creaks open and shuts again. The ordinary life of the village begins to stir. But not for you. You, traveler of history, are ready to sleep now, not in a lumpy tavern bed, not on a creaky bench beside a goose, but wherever you lay your head tonight, surrounded by soft sheets, the hum of a fan, and the quiet comfort of having wandered through time. Close your eyes. Let your thoughts settle like dust on a quiet shelf. You've earned this rest. But the story doesn't end there. The road outside is slick with rain, and your boots are soaked through. Ahead, through the mist and the darkness, you spot a crooked roofline, firelight flickering behind warped windows, and laughter rising like smoke into the night. Another tavern, another night. You step off the road and into a creaky, smoky room, humming with song and slurred stories. A medieval tavern, to be exact. Imagine your boots squelching through mud as you push open the oak door. The warmth of a fire licking your cheeks, the air thick with the scent of roasted onions, damp wool, and a kind of ale that would probably make you gag. You're tired. You've walked a full day's journey through the English countryside, and this tavern, dimly lit and leaning slightly to the left, is the only promise of rest food and a drink that might kill the taste of dust in your mouth. Though fair warning, it might replace it with something worse. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And of course, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love reading those. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The door groans shut behind you. Your eyes adjust. The room flickers in firelight, casting long shadows on rough stone walls. There's a haze of smoke hanging in the air, wood smoke mostly, but also the ghost of someone's pipe and the unmistakable smell of something singed. A dog sprawls near the hearth tail, thumping occasionally, snoring louder than seems possible. No one glances up as you enter. That's good. You're a traveler, anonymous, and that anonymity could be worth its weight in coin. A bench opens near the far wall, right under a pair of antlers mounted askew. You settle in, rubbing your hands to bring warmth back to your fingers. It's loud, but not chaotic. Voices bounce from beam to beam, overlapping in laughter-slurred songs and the occasional hiccuped curse. A pot clangs in the back room, followed by the unmistakable crash of crockery. No one flinches. Clearly, that's just Bertha again. On a table near you, someone is carving their name into the wood with a dagger. The table is already a patchwork of such markings. Initials, doodles, crude jokes scratched by hands that drank too much to care about penmanship. It's practically a medieval guest book. You take it all in the heavy timber beams overhead, soot darkened and etched with old charms to keep out spirits and tax collectors. The uneven floor, straw-strewn and sticky with spilled ale, and the fireplace, where a pot of something indistinct and possibly edible bubbles ominously. In one corner, a group of men are playing a game involving bones, possibly dice, possibly the remains of someone's lunch, and shouting with every roll. There's a woman laughing too loudly at a joke no one else heard. A man in a feathered cap slumps over the bar, mumbling a song in what might once have been French. You notice a painted sign above the hearth, a crudely drawn pig dancing with a tankard. It's unclear whether that's the tavern's name or just someone's idea of decor. Regardless, it's charming in a grime-covered sort of way. This is no modern bar. There's no menu, no lights, no sense of hygiene beyond wiping the tankards with the same cloth all night. But there's warmth and stories and something about the clatter of a busy tavern that makes you feel like you've landed inside the lungs of the village. It breathes here, loudly, boozily, and with no concern for your personal space. You pull your hood down and try to blend in, but let's be honest, your boots are too clean, your cloak too intact. A few eyes size you up from beneath drooping eyelids. but they're too tired or drunk to care much. One nods your way, then belches. This is the Medieval Tavern, friend. It's not glamorous, it's not particularly clean, but it's alive. And for tonight, so are you. You lean back slightly, trying to take in more of the tavern without making it obvious you're new here. The bench groans beneath you, and you instinctively shift to avoid a suspiciously damp patch. Above the beams, drip with condensation from the mingling of damp cloaks, steaming bodies, and a fire that doesn't quite reach the corners of the room. The place is a symphony of oddly paired notes, the sharp twang of a lute missing two strings, the dull thunk of tankards hitting tables, and the occasional burst of laughter that turns into a coughing fit. The smell at this point is becoming familiar. Earthy, fermented. There's stale sweat and wool and something definitely fungal. You don't ask questions. Near the door, a man with cheeks the color of boiled beets holds up a tankard and slurs a toast to St. Arnold, the patron saint of brewers, he claims. Whether that's accurate or just tavern lore is anyone's guess. Historians still argue whether Arnold of Soissons or Arnold of Metz really holds the title, but frankly, in this room it doesn't matter. The ale's flowing, and that's wholly enough. A boy, no older than 10 ducks, between tables, refilling mugs from a wooden bucket he lugs with both arms. He doesn't speak. He just makes eye contact, tips the bucket slightly, and moves on. You watch one old man dip his finger in and sniff the contents suspiciously before shrugging and downing the whole thing. Somewhere nearby, a woman argues with a merchant about whether his coins are clipped. He insists they're full weight. She taps them against her teeth. The conversation ends when he throws in a boiled egg and a strip of eel jerky. Negotiation, medieval style. You shift again. The table before you is sticky with old spills and smells faintly of smoked herring. You try not to breathe too deeply as a fresh tankard is slammed down in front of you. It's warm to the touch, and the liquid sloshes like a living thing. Foam gathers at the rim, dense and tan like bread dough. This, you think, is what they drink. This is history in liquid form. Someone sneezes behind you with such force it rattles the shutters. The dog by the hearth startles, growls half-heartedly, and settles back into snoring. A burly man in a patched tunic bellows for another round, revealing several missing teeth and one rather heroic eyebrow. Overhead, bunches of dried herbs hang from the beams, lavender sage mugwort, supposedly to purify the air, ward off sickness, or keep the tavern spirits from souring the drink. Or maybe just because someone liked the smell. Either way, the effect is mildly pleasant, cutting through the ale mist like a ghost of a forgotten garden. A serving woman passes you balancing 3 tankards and a trencher of bread with one hand. She mutters something under her breath that might be a curse or might just be the day's special. Her apron is streaked with gravy and soot, and she wears a linen cap so tightly fastened you wonder if it's holding her skull together. At the far end of the room, there's a game of storytelling underway. A bald man with a voice like a gravel cart is recounting how he once wrestled a bear for the hand of a miller's daughter. The others groan they've heard this one, but they let him go on. Maybe this time the bear wins. Above the fireplace, smoke curls and dances. There's a pot suspended from an iron hook, and whatever's in it bubbles in a way that doesn't inspire confidence. A few patrons hover close, tearing hunks of dark bread and dipping them in without asking. Communal soup, or stew, or possibly glue. You pull your cloak tighter and let the atmosphere soak in. There's something comforting about the chaos. The noise, the shared bodily warmth of too many people in too small a space. The tavern is messy and loud and undeniably human. You spot a crude carving on the wall, a little stick figure, man, beside the etched words, "Richard smelt it." You don't know what he smelt, but judging by the scent wafting from the privy door near the back, you have a few guesses. The door creaks open again. Another traveler, soaked and wind-blown, stumbles in. No one turns. They've seen it all before. You now fully immersed, simply scoot over and offer space on your bench. He nods in gratitude and drops a wet bundle of rags that might once have been a hat. You've only been here minutes, but already the tavern feels like it's always existed, like it's older than the road outside, older than the town itself. A knot in the world where time spills sideways, sloshing like warm ale. The boy with the bucket returns, and this time he pauses in front of you, eyeing your clothes with practiced indifference. You nod. He dips a tin ladle into the bucket and fills your wooden tankard without a word. You pass him a small copper coin, one of the ones you didn't hide in your boot, and he scurries away, his feet slapping against the straw-covered floor. You stare at the drink for a moment. It smells complex. There's a tang of something fermented, sure, but also a hint of herbs and something bordering on damp socks. You raise it cautiously to your lips and take a sip. It's not cold. It's never cold. There's no such thing as refrigeration here, at least not in the way you're used to. The ale is thick, almost chewy, and warm, like tea left too long in a sunbeam. The first taste is bready, then sour, and finally alarmingly bitter. Your tongue doesn't know where to retreat. Still, after the second sip, the shock fades, and a kind of malty comfort creeps in. This is ale before hops, before bottling, before factory precision. It's a living thing, brewed in small batches by someone with more instinct than recipe. Every village, every tavern, every brew, even every bucket, tastes slightly different. The yeast is wild. The grain could be barley, oats, rye, or a mysterious mix. The herbs, whatever grew nearby and didn't kill anyone last time. Historians still argue whether this sort of ale should be called small beer or table ale, but what's clear is that people drank it constantly, not just because it was tasty, or at least drinkable, but because water wasn't always safe. Boiling grain into beer made it less likely to harbor disease, and so even children had their own diluted versions. You take another sip. It's growing on you, sort of. At the next table, an older man swishes his tankard and sniffs like a connoisseur. Juniper, he mutters to no one, and lavender, and maybe a hint of horse blanket. He seems pleased. He drains the rest. The woman with the apron leans over your shoulder. "That one's a Tuesday brew," she says. "Bertha makes it. She says it's meant to taste like bread gone bad on purpose." Then she moves on, hollering for someone to stop stealing pickled eggs. You set your mug down, lips tingling slightly. The ale is strong, but not in the modern alcoholic sense. It's more of a full-body sensation, like warm wool from the inside out. It nestles in your belly, softens your edges. You begin to see why people spent half their lives in taverns. At the bar, a red-faced man explains to an unimpressed youth that ale cures coughs, baldness, and melancholy. I had a cousin, he says, who drank nothing but ale for 7 years and only died when he fell into a vat of it. The youth nods slowly, clearly, not for the first time. You glance around. Each patron seems to have their own drink, their own relationship with it. A skinny girl dips bread into hers like soup. A merchant has added a sprig of something green. The minstrel in the corner is already onto his third and tuning his instrument with dramatic flair. There's no standard pour, no pint glass, no head of foam, just so. But what there is, undeniably, is community. Shared mugs, shared laughter, and occasionally shared regret. You sip again. This one is earthier now. You're starting to suspect the flavor changes mid-mug. Outside, the wind howls briefly, rattling the shutters. Someone bolts the door, then resumes playing a game involving sticks and a very confused chicken. The tavern seems smaller now, cozier. You no longer notice the smell. You glance down at your tankard, now half empty, or half full depending on your mood. You swirl it slightly. There's a kind of sediment at the bottom. Don't think about it, just drink. You're beginning to understand this isn't just alcohol. It's sustenance, social glue, minor medicine, and mealtime, all rolled into one. It's the thread that sews the village together, one sticky sip at a time. You cradle the tankard in your hands, studying the way the candlelight dances across its surface. The ale has settled now, the foam all but gone, leaving behind a cloudy amber puddle that smells faintly of overripe apples and wet grain. You take another sip now, braver, and let it linger. The taste has evolved. There's a sour edge that catches you off guard, almost like vinegar sneaking up at the end. But then it fades into a toasted flavor, warm and nutty, like the crust of coarse bread. It's hearty, not pleasant necessarily, but filling, grounding. This is drink as food. You wonder aloud, is this what they all drank? The man beside you, who appears to be a carpenter by his thick hands and wood-shaving dusted sleeves, chuckles. That there's mild. You ought to try Old Muckbottom's brew if you want your eyebrows singed. He gestures to a dented tankard with something the color of swamp water. Tastes like a peat bog, but it gets the job done. Historians still debate what medieval ale truly tasted like. No written recipe captures the exact flavor, and even when modern brewers try to recreate it, the yeasts, grains, and even water have changed so drastically that we can only guess. Some say it was sweet and thick, others say thin and sour. The truth likely varied wildly depending on region, season, and whoever happened to be stirring the pot that week. Take, for example, the use of Groot, a herbal blend often used before hops became widespread. Your tankard likely contains a bit of yarrow or horehound, maybe even wild rosemary. These herbs gave ale both flavor and a slight narcotic effect, not to mention a boost in preservation. Though some of them, historians warn, might have also made folks hallucinate, or in extreme cases stop breathing. So, that's comforting. You glance around the tavern. Everyone is drinking something different. The poor man in the corner with his muddy boots and patched elbows is sipping a cloudy brew in a clay mug. The more finely dressed woman, 2 benches down, has something clearer, possibly a small beer meant for travelers or women of gentle station. Or maybe it's just rainwater someone bottled. There's no standard strength. Some ales were weak enough to hydrate you during chores. Others were potent enough to put you on your back for a day. You're somewhere in the middle, just tipsy enough to feel your limbs soften, but still alert enough to keep one hand near your coin pouch. A serving girl refills your tankard with a practiced slosh spilling just enough to make your palm sticky. "This batch has got nettle," she says proudly. Bertha says it's for your joints or your sins. Then she's gone. You sip again. Nettle possibly. There's a greenish bitterness that wasn't there before. Or maybe your tongue is adapting. The fire pops, sending a flare of sparks into the chimney. In the sudden burst of light, you notice a mural etched into the blackened stone above the hearth. A crude drawing of a crowned man holding a goblet and laughing. The locals call him Old King Ale, and every tavern, they claim, has a version of him. One particularly round man points at the mural and says, "He's the patron saint of getting just drunk enough to sing not enough to fall." Then he toasts the air and takes a gulp. The dog by the hearth farts audibly and doesn't wake. You chuckle, feeling a warmth not just from the drink, but from the simple humanity of it all. These people farmers, tinkers, traveling merchants drink not just to dull pain or pass time, but to share stories, settle disputes, and celebrate a rare good harvest. You finish the last of your mug and tip it upside down. A single drop clings to the rim like a final joke. You set it aside and lean back. You're not sure if the drink was good exactly, but it was real, tangible, alive in a way that modern beverages aren't. It surprised you, challenged you, and in the end, left you just a little bit better off than when you walked in. You rise from your bench tankard in hand and edge toward the back of the tavern. Behind a curtain strung from an old ox yoke is the brewing room, or what passes for it. It's barely more than a lean-to tacked onto the building, where the air is damp with steam, and the scent of grain hangs heavy like porridge gone rogue. A woman, hunched over a massive wooden vat, looks up as you enter. She's stirring with what looks like an ore sweat beading on her brow. Her sleeves are rolled to the elbows, revealing arms corded with muscle from years of wrestling hot mash and wooden barrels. This is Bertha. You've heard her name several times now, usually shouted in moments of crisis or when someone spills something expensive. She nods at your tankard. Want to see how that's made? You nod. She hands you a bundle of dried herbs, sweet gale yarrow, and a few you can't identify. They smell sharp and vaguely medicinal. "Groot," she explains. "We don't use hops, not in this region. Nuns do. We're not nuns. That's true." This place has the feel of cheerful defiance, not quiet contemplation. Bertha points out the key parts of the process. First comes the mash grains barley oats, sometimes rye, soaked in hot water to extract sugars. The result is something like a sticky hot cereal. She invites you to dip a finger in and taste it. It's sweet, earthy, and oddly comforting. Then comes the boil. In a blackened cauldron, over a smoky fire, the mash is heated and stirred with meticulous care. It's here that the Groot goes in flavoring and preserving the ale. You toss your herbs into the pot and watch them swirl like leaves in autumn wind. The steam that rises smells like a forest floor and old honey Historians still argue whether gruit ales offered consistent flavor or were little more than surprise soup with alcohol. The truth likely lies in the brewer's hands. Some were masters, others more enthusiastic than skilled. But even the worst batch could lift spirits, if only because it gave people something to talk about and sometimes sue over. You watch as Bertha ladles out some of the mixture into a smaller vessel, which she sets near the hearth to cool. "That's for the yeast," she says. "You can't pitch it too hot, or it dies." "And then you're drinking oatmeal water." She shudders. "The yeast is wild harvested from the air, the rafters, even the brewer's own hands. There's no sterile lab, no pH strips, just gut instinct and a battered old spoon. Bertha's been doing this for 30 years. I trust my nose," she says. "And my cat. If he runs away, it's bad brew." A black cat, currently perched atop a barrel, blinks at you with mild disdain. He appears unmoved. Good sign. Fermentation takes a few days, depending on the weather and the temperament of the yeast. The ale then goes into barrels, coopered nearby, likely using wood, from the same forests that supplied your gruit, and is stored in the cellar. That's where the flavor deepens, the bubbles form, and the character of the ale reveals itself. Or doesn't. Bertha leads you to a row of tapped barrels, each marked with chalk, sour goat mild flame church stuff, and worryingly Thursday. You tap the side of Thursday. It thuds ominously. She pours you a small sample. You taste. It's zesty, sharp at the front, mellow in the middle, and finishes like smoked hay. Somehow it works. Bertha smiles. "Not bad for swamp water, eh?" You grin and raise your cup. This is brewing in the medieval world, equal parts ritual guesswork and inherited wisdom. There are no measurements, no thermometers, no precision timers. Just taste, smell, and the twitch of a brewer's nose that says, "Aha, it's ready." As you step back into the tavern, blinking through the smoky haze, the room feels different. Not just a place of noise and warmth, but a kind of alchemical temple where grain and water become joy, where herbs and yeast make memory, and where every pint is a potion brewed to soften the day. You're back at your bench now, slightly dusted with grain smoke, and feeling wiser, or at least warmer, for having seen the ale's birthplace. Across the table, a woman with laugh lines carved deep into her cheeks raises her mug in your direction. "Alewife or no, that Bertha could charm the devil with her brewing," she says, tipping her tankard back. You nod in agreement. It's time to learn about the women behind the brews. Alewives, brewsters, words you've never thought much about, but which carried power in the medieval world. Long before brewing became a regulated male-dominated guild craft, women brewed almost all of the household ale across northern Europe. You look around the tavern and notice them 3 women behind the bar. 2 more ferrying food and refills, and 1 sweeping near the door with a broomstick worn thin. Each one tied to this place not just by blood or marriage, but by skill. Brewing was one of the few economic avenues available to medieval women, and many made it an art. Historians still argue whether these women were honored for their craft or merely tolerated. Some records suggest they were central to village life. Others show them accused of overcharging, watering down, or cursing competitors. Occasionally all 3. You hear laughter from the back table. The brewer's cat has now found its way onto a patron's lap and is being fed bits of fish pie. The man chuckles. You know the old rhyme, Trust not an alewife with clean hands, nor a brewer with dry boots. It doesn't quite rhyme, but you let it slide. Brewsters like Bertha were known for marking their homes with a broomstick, what some now call a witch's broom, hanging outside the door to signal fresh ale. You picture a crooked cottage with a worn threshold and the scent of boiling grain in the air. That was the brewery. That was the business. In some towns, ale tasting was even a semi-official role. Local authorities would appoint ale conners whose job was to sample the ale for quality and fairness. One of the tests involved pouring the ale on a bench, then sitting on it in leather breeches. If the conner couldn't stand up afterward, due to the stickiness of the unfermented sugars, it was considered good strong ale. This method, you note, is no longer in use. The woman beside you, her name's Maud, she says, leans in. My mum brewed with coriander and birch bark. Said it made men docile. She smirks. Worked better than sermons. These women weren't just brewers. They were chemists, herbalists, entrepreneurs, and occasionally scapegoats. When ale turned bad, it was often blamed on sin sorcery or simply a woman's poor judgment. But when it went right, it filled this room with songs soothed the sick child or paid the winter's rent. One infamous pamphlet from the 16th century rails against alewives, claiming they used chicken feathers, soot, and rotten apples in their brew. Most historians dismiss it as misogynistic slander, or at least very niche taste. But the legend stuck. Some believe the classic image of a witch cauldron broomstick cat was borrowed wholesale from the image of the village brewster. You watch Bertha pass through the room, again this time, carrying a tray with mugs balanced precariously on her shoulder. Someone catcalls. She replies without breaking stride. I'll serve your drink, not your delusions. The room bursts into laughter. You sip your ale, thinking about the long line of women who stood over vats, just like the one you saw stirring and testing and hoping the yeast would do its work. The line stretches back to Mesopotamia, to ancient Egypt, to Viking longhouses and Roman kitchens. Their hands invisible but eternal have flavored every drop. You've lost track of how many sips you've taken. Not because you're drunk, though your limbs are certainly looser, but because the rhythm of the tavern has pulled you in. Here the hours blur. It's always just before the next toast, always just after the last good joke. Across the table, Maud is now arm wrestling the carpenter. They're both laughing too hard to take it seriously. You take a moment to observe the other patrons, their routines, their habits, their quiet rituals with tankards and trenchers. This tavern isn't just a place to drink. It's the village's breathing room, its meeting hall, its unofficial courthouse, its confessional. And on days like this, it's theater. And for many people, it's as routine as brushing teeth, if teeth brushing existed. In the medieval world, ale wasn't a treat. It was a staple. You drank it at breakfast, lunch, dinner, and in between. Small beer for the children, middling for the workers, strong for the occasions when dignity was optional. Water was risky, milk was rare, and wine was for nobles or monks with good vineyard connections. Historians still argue whether this constant consumption equated to constant drunkenness, but most medieval ale was lower in alcohol than today's beers, closer to weak wine or strong tea. It didn't knock you down. It padded your steps. The bell near the bar chimes once. The tavern has no clock, of course, but everyone reacts. It's the hour when things shift, when the mood pivots from bustling to lingering. People finish their mugs more slowly. Voices lower. Boots are scraped cleaner, not muddier. You follow the carpenter as he refills his mug. He nods toward a wall where a list has been scrawled in chalk names, tallies, cryptic symbols. Tabs, he explains. Some folks pay weekly, others barter. You drink what you're owed. He gestures toward a grizzled man with hay in his beard. That one's here on a chicken debt. Brought 6 hens in spring. Drinks till Christmas. You glance around again now, tuned to the quieter details. A man at the window always raises his mug. Before each sip, perhaps a private toast. A woman counts her coins before every refill, even if it's the same number. An older couple share one mug between them, each sip taken with practiced timing. This, then, is the daily ritual of the tavern goer. It's not the debauchery that scrolls imagine, or the chaos of bardic tales. It's familiarity, comfort, a warm space where the same people sit in the same corners, laugh at the same jokes, and grumble about the same mud on the road. Your own hand moves instinctively toward your tankard. Empty again. The boy with the bucket is nowhere in sight. Instead, you lift it slightly and give it a hopeful wave. Maud spots it. You've learned the signal, she says with mock solemnity. You're one of us now. The minstrel tunes his lute again this time, hitting all the strings. A few heads turn. A song begins low and lilting, something about a maiden, a river, and a wheel of cheese. You lose track of the plot halfway through, but it doesn't matter. It fills the room like another log on the fire. This is the kind of place where people come not to escape life, but to live the parts that don't fit anywhere else. To rest after harvest. To meet the neighbor they only wave at. To wait for news from town. To pass the candle hours in a place where you're always welcome if you sit, drink, and don't ask too many questions. You lean back, your head warm, your thoughts slower. This is what daily life was like for the common folk. Not battles, not castles, not plagues. Well, not every week. Just drink, talk warmth, and the satisfaction of surviving another day. A sudden cheer erupts from the far side of the room. You twist in your seat, careful not to knock over your refilled mug, just in time to witness a sight both bizarre and weirdly delightful. A goose clearly annoyed and possibly drunk waddling between the legs of a man trying to roll dice on the floor. The tavern has shifted into its rowdy phase. You watch as coins clink, insults fly, and someone tries to balance a spoon on their nose. This, you quickly realize, is the entertainment portion of the evening. Games, gossip, and yes, goose fights. The table behind you is engaged in a medieval drinking game called Scent, where players take turns tossing small stones into a bucket, and the loser must compose a rhyme or finish someone else's ale. One man keeps losing, and now speaks only in couplets. Another round he asks, I dare not pass, though last time's brew did burn my enough, someone cuts in. Laughter, always laughter. Taverns were never just for drinking. They were the community's living room. People gathered here to celebrate births, mourn deaths, settle arguments, and more commonly argue about which saint was best at curing toothaches. You listen as 2 older women debate loudly over whether Saint Apollonia or Saint Odelia performed more miracles in childbirth. Neither appears to be pregnant, but both are very committed. A third woman just keeps nodding and eating pickled onions. Gossip flows more freely than ale. Someone mentions that the blacksmith's apprentice has been seen sneaking out of the miller's barn at odd hours. Another claims that the vicar's geese are disappearing one by one. Coincidence asks a man with sauce on his chin or hunger. You hear whispers of local scandal. Who owes taxes? Who's marrying whom? Who shouldn't be? And who was seen buying candles on a Sunday? Shocking stuff. Historians still argue whether these tavern tales were reliable sources of local intelligence or simply communal nonsense dressed as news. In either case, they served a purpose, bonding, venting distraction. The games get more physical as the ale deepens. A challenge arises between a stable boy and a tanner to balance a clay jug on their heads while dancing. It lasts about 3 steps before both slip on spilled stew and collapse in a heap of laughter and broth. And then there's the goose again. No one knows who brought it in, but there it is flapping indignantly at a bard's feet. The dog from earlier wakes briefly to bark at it, then remembers its priorities and returns to snoring. Someone tosses a crust of bread, and the goose takes off across the room, wings flapping legs, skittering, scattering coins and curses in its wake. You take another sip of your now lukewarm ale and smile. This is absurd. This is perfect. There's even a crude stage at the back of the tavern, really just a slightly elevated plank. But tonight, it's occupied by a boy with a broken jaw harp and a girl reciting a poem about turnips. You don't understand all of it, but the delivery is passionate. Here lies the root, both boiled and baked, in soups and pies, though rarely flaked. Applause, some real, some sarcastic. Either way, it fills the room with warmth. This tavern is no palace, no courtly banquet hall, but it has joy, real clumsy goose-dodging joy. And in a time where days were hard and nights were long, moments like these mattered more than anyone dared admit. You raise your mug to the chaos, to the goose, to the turnip poet, to the strange, wonderful fact that this is history too. Not the battles or the kings, but the dice rolls and the rumors and the games no one wrote down. The clamor dims just enough for the sound of plucked strings to rise above it. You turn toward the far side of the tavern where a lanky figure in a patchwork tunic adjusts the tension on his battered lute. His fingers move with more hope than precision, and a few people groan in anticipation, whether from excitement or dread, you can't quite tell. A hush, or something close to it, settles over the room. He strums a few tentative notes, then clears his throat. Tonight, he announces dramatically a ballad of love war and regrettable cheese. A cheer goes up. You brace yourself. Music in a medieval tavern isn't a performance in the modern sense, it's a negotiation. You play, they drink, and if they like it, maybe someone tosses a coin or an old turnip in your direction. If they don't, well, the goose has bitten for less. He launches into a tune. The melody is surprisingly sweet, the lyrics less so. It involves a knight, a milkmaid, and a misunderstanding involving a sack of eels. The refrain is catchy, and soon half the room joins in their timing off and their pitch worse. Doesn't matter. This isn't about beauty. It's about noise and togetherness and something to hum when you're mucking stalls the next morning. Historians still argue whether these traveling minstrels were truly artists or merely glorified gossipers with instruments. In truth, they were both and neither. Many memorized hundreds of verses, tailoring them on the fly to suit the crowd. They traded in news jokes, history, and shameless exaggeration. Between verses, the minstrel pulls out a crumpled paper more gesture than necessity and announces a request. To the lady who asked for the tale of Sir Grelkin's missing pants, "This one's for you." A woman in the corner raises her mug. "He left 'em in my yard," laughter ripples again. Even the barmaids pause their work to smile. You glance around. Music has transformed the room. Even the grumpy merchant who'd been muttering into his drink is now tapping a spoon in rhythm. The boy with the bucket does a half dance on his way back from the hearth, sloshing ale as he goes. Instruments are scarce here. Besides the lute, you spot a drum made from a repurposed cheese wheel, a recorder that squeals more than sings, and alarmingly, a hurdy-gurdy missing a crank. A man simply hums in its direction, hoping no one notices. You've never heard so many wrong notes hit so confidently. One older man begins a chant slow and low, more dirge than song, and others join in. It's a familiar rhythm, tied to sowing or harvest passed down from generations. The lyrics are about mud bees and something unprintable about bishops. This is oral history at work. No parchment, no ink, just melody and memory. A small girl sings a lullaby in the corner to a doll missing one arm. Her tune is quieter, but the table nearby still leans in to listen. One man wipes his eyes and blames the smoke. You sip your ale now, just a puddle, and let the music carry you. The tavern becomes something timeless, echoing with voices layered across centuries. Not perfect, not polished, but utterly human. These songs won't survive the ages. No chronicler will transcribe the lyrics about the night and the eels. But tonight, they matter. They shape the room, bind strangers, and lull you towards something close to peace. You barely notice him at first, the man who slides onto the bench across from you. He moves quietly, his cloak soaked at the edges, hands weathered and cracked. No one else reacts. In a tavern like this, a stranger is just another story waiting to be told. He sets down his pack and offers a nod. You nod back. This is how conversations begin. Here without preamble. Names might come later or not at all. You study him subtly. Pilgrim, you think. His staff leans against the wall behind him, carved with strange symbols. A small scallop shell dangles from his belt, the telltale badge of one returning from Compostela or claiming to. Long road, you ask? He shrugs. Long enough to forget why I started. That sounds about right. Moments later, a second figure drops into the space beside you. He's rounder, wrapped in layers of wool and leather, with eyes that scan the room like a man trying to value everything inside. A peddler, perhaps. His bag bulges with trinkets and wears a wooden flute sticking out one side. Good crowd tonight, he mutters. Good crowd means loose pockets. You're not sure if that's a confession or a warning. And then improbably a third joins. A monk, or at least someone dressed like one. His robe is patched, his sandals caked in dirt, and he smells faintly of incense and much more strongly of wine. He smiles beatifically. Peace be with you, he says, slurring only slightly. Now your table is full. Strangers, each carved from different wood, each carrying the road's dust in their own way. They begin talking not to each other exactly, but near each other. The peddler recounts a tale of a town where bread fell from the sky. The pilgrim mutters something about relics that heal headaches, but only on Tuesdays. The monk just hums, sipping from a flask marked only with a crude cross. Historians still argue whether medieval taverns were melting pots or minefields. Both likely. Here class blurred. A knight might sit beside a peasant if they shared a drink. Secrets changed hands, alliances were born, and occasionally someone woke up without their boots. You offer to buy the next round, surprising even yourself. The peddler laughs. A generous soul, he says. Must have just arrived. You wave down the bucket boy, who now appears to be accompanied by the goose from earlier, tied loosely with twine. The bird hisses at everyone. No one cares. Drinks arrive, sloshed liberally. The monk blesses his mug, then drinks it in one gulp. The pilgrim sniffs his before sipping. The peddler drops a ring into his for luck. The conversation shifts to weather, then roads, then which saints are best at curing boils. The monk claims Saint Fiacre. The peddler swears by Saint Elmo. The pilgrim shrugs. I just pray to whoever's listening. These are the voices of the road. They carry the world in fragments, like mosaic tiles from far-flung villages. They've seen things the locals haven't: storm-wrecked abbeys, silent forests. Towns where the bells ring by themselves. Whether true or not, it doesn't matter. Tonight in the tavern, their tales are real. Someone at a nearby table leans over curious. Another joins. Soon your corner becomes a pocket of storytelling. Someone offers dried figs. Another hands over a piece of salted pork. The monk burps softly, then begins to snore upright, head bobbing like a boat on waves. You catch Maud's eye from across the room. She winks as if to say, "See, this is how it works." You look at your table now, strewn with crumbs and tankards and strange objects. A wooden comb, a painted dice, a feather wrapped in twine. None of it valuable, all of it priceless. You didn't know these people an hour ago. Tomorrow, you may never see them again. But for this night, you're a company, a chorus of the road, bound by the same ale, the same stories, the same brief warmth against the dark. The door creaks open again, letting in a gust of cold night air and the unmistakable scent of wet hay. A man ducks inside, shaking water from his shoulders like a drenched dog. Behind him, someone groans, not because of the weather, but because they recognize him. That one got banned for swordplay last. Whitson mutters, the peddler beside you. Not fighting, actual play. Tried to stage a drama with props and poked the brewer's goat. The man wanders in anyway. No one stops him. The tavern has rules, but their enforcement depends on mood memory and how much ale the staff has had. You glance around and start to notice them, not just the obvious ones, but the unspoken, the ritualized, the deeply strange. Medieval taverns were governed by a patchwork of local customs and laws, many of them so specific they sound made up. But they weren't. Over the bar, you spot a sign scrawled in faded ink: no duels after vespers, no livestock beyond the hearth, all dice to be blessed by Jonas. Jonas presumably is the wide-eyed boy now watching the goose nibble on a boot. Taverns were often under tight scrutiny from local authorities, partly because they attracted trouble, but also because they were breeding grounds for rebellion rumor and unpaid taxes. In some towns, ale houses required a license. In others, they were expected to enforce curfews, report suspicious strangers, and ensure no dice games happened on holy days. Historians still argue whether these rules were actually enforced or simply performative ink on parchment. Some landlords took them seriously. Others simply paid the local reeve a side fee and did as they pleased. You spot another rule etched into the wood beam above your head. No songs about the bishop's cousin. You raise your eyebrows. Someone has scratched "why" beneath it. No answer provided. Maud, now 3 mugs deep and leaning comfortably against your shoulder, offers commentary. You can't wear armor inside. That one's real. Took us 3 weeks to scrub blood out of the rushes last time. She pauses. Also, no pigs. Which makes sense. They get handsy. A group near the fire is discussing fines. Apparently belching at the barmaid costs a penny. Throwing up in the turnip barrel, a shilling and a firm apology. Public nudity is negotiable depending on the weather and whether or not it's your birthday. The monk, now awake and slightly damp, raises a finger. There is also the rule of the 3rd mug, he declares solemnly. After the 3rd mug, all debts are forgiven and all singing must rhyme. He is immediately pelted with stale bread. Not all rules were about behavior. Some protected the ale itself. Landlords could be fined for watering down the drink, selling it too warm, or using forbidden ingredients. Women brewers were often accused of witchcraft if their ale turned sour, or if their success made others jealous. The peddler tells you of one tavern in Kent where patrons had to kiss a carved frog on the bar before ordering. Froggy was the judge. If he liked you, you drank, if not back into the night. You're not sure if he's joking. Back at the door, the man with the wet shoulders is arguing with Bertha. Something about a borrowed stool and a chicken-related misunderstanding. She points wordlessly at a large wooden spoon mounted on the wall. He backs away. Apparently, that's the tavern's equivalent of a final warning. Rules formal or not hold this place together. They're threads in the ale-soaked tapestry, half remembered, half invented, but honored in their own odd way. You sip your drink and smile. There's comfort in knowing someone once cared enough to forbid pig races indoors, or to limit eel juggling to feast days. These weren't laws to control. These were stories etched into habit logic, wrapped in ale and tradition disguised as nonsense. You rise slowly, careful not to trip over the dog, now sprawled across half the floor like a very satisfied bearskin rug. You're hungry, genuinely, finally, and the mingling aromas of roasted onions, fatty broth, and something vaguely barnyardish have pushed your curiosity to the tipping point. The food, such as it is served from a dark corner behind the hearth, where a woman with arms like tree trunks ladles portions into cracked bowls. You shuffle forward and receive your prize, a wooden trencher, holding something lumpy, steaming, and undeniably edible. It's a pie, possibly. The crust is flaky on top and soaked through beneath with a filling that might be minced meat mushrooms or daring hope. There's also a small slab of cheese, yellowish, sweating slightly, and a slice of coarse bread, so dense it could double as a weapon. You carry it back carefully to your bench, where Maud has taken up residence with one foot resting on the peddler's sack. "That smells better than last week's," she says. No cabbage this time. That's progress. You take a cautious bite. The crust is soft, the filling peppery. It's warm and surprisingly satisfying, though every few bites you encounter something crunchy that raises questions better left unanswered. Dining in a medieval tavern isn't about presentation. There are no forks, just fingers, knives, and the occasional communal spoon. A man across the room is eating with what looks like a whittled stick. Another simply scoops his stew with chunks of bread, occasionally wiping his beard on his sleeve. You watch as a plate of pottage, a thick, porridge-like mix of grains and vegetables, passes by. Someone's added boiled eggs to theirs. Someone else has dropped a fish head in and calls it soup. The floor beneath you has become a tapestry of crumbs, spilled ale, stray bones, and the occasional vegetable peel. Rushes once scattered to absorb moisture now form clumps that squelch when stepped on. You adjust your feet and find one boot firmly stuck. You tug. It releases with a sound like a resigned sigh. Historians still argue whether the food in taverns was bad by modern standards or simply unfamiliar. Taste buds were different then. People expected their meals to be hearty spiced with whatever was available pepper. If you were lucky, mustard seed if you weren't. Sweet and savory often shared the same plate, and refrigeration was less of a process and more of a fond wish. Maud offers you a pickle. You decline. She eats it with a snap. From the hearth, the cook calls out. Next up, onion mash and fish scraps. Half the room cheers. A man near the bar asks if it comes with gravy. She replies, "It comes with regret." You glance at your half-eaten pie. Somehow, you're still enjoying it. The noise swells again as people finish their meals and wipe their hands on cloak sleeves or each other. The boy with the goose tries to sweep the floor with a broom twice his size, succeeding only in spreading the muck evenly. One of the rules you read earlier returns to mind: no pigs past the hearth. It makes more sense now. The floor is treacherous enough without trotters involved. You notice a pair of chickens asleep on a stool, and what might be a cat under a bench, pawing half-heartedly at a lost dumpling. The line between kitchen and dining room pet and food is flexible. Someone toasts to the cook. Someone else toasts to the cow that presumably donated the cheese. You raise your mug too, mostly because it feels like the thing to do. Your pie is finished. Your fingers are sticky. The dog farts again. You sigh, full in stomach and spirit. This meal wouldn't pass modern inspection. But here now, in this smoky, muddy, utterly alive place, it's the best thing you've had all week. You didn't plan to stay the night. In fact, you were quite certain you'd drink a mug or two, maybe sample the stew, and then stumble out under the stars to find a hayloft or barn corner to call your own. But that was several tankards ago. And now your eyes are heavy, your limbs are warm, and your options are limited. Beds, you ask Maud. She snorts. This is the bed. She's not wrong. Most medieval taverns didn't have individual rooms for the average traveler. That was a luxury for wealthy merchants, clergy, or knights who could afford an upstairs chamber with a straw mattress and maybe a curtain. For everyone else, it was the common room, right where you're sitting. You lean back, feeling the wall behind you, now warm from the hearth and from the bodies pressed against it earlier. Around the room, others are settling in, some sliding down the wall until they're horizontal. Others curling up on benches, using cloaks or sacks, or even cabbages as pillows. A man near the fire is already snoring. Another is still upright, tankard in hand, but his eyes have rolled back in a way that suggests he'll soon meet the floor. The minstrel is under the table, gently hugging his lute. You find a spot under a window mostly dry and lay your cloak down as a makeshift blanket. The wooden floor is hard, but you're past the point of caring. A serving woman steps over you delicately, balancing a bucket. She mutters something about drunken floor gremlins and tosses a few rushes over a puddle nearby. It's unclear if it's ale broth or something more ominous. The peddler from earlier has curled up with his sack of wares as a pillow, his hat pulled over his face. The monk is propped against the hearth, mumbling prayers to a saint you're fairly sure he invented. Historians still argue whether sleeping in taverns was officially allowed or simply tolerated. In many places, the law required landlords to provide beds or at least dry straw for travelers, but those laws often met the reality of overflowing rooms and customers too drunk to leave. You spot a trio huddled together like puppies in a hay nest, sharing one blanket between them. One of them farts. No one moves. There are no nightlights, only the dying fire and the flicker of a few stubborn candles. Shadows stretch long across the beams, dancing with the smoke that never quite finds the chimney. You shift, trying to find a spot that doesn't press a barrel stave into your back. The floor is cold, your feet are damp, and your head hums with the strange mix of ale and onion pie. And yet there's comfort here, a shared exhaustion, a communal surrender to the night. Someone steps on your hand. They apologize by dropping a bit of cheese into your lap. You accept the apology. It's good cheese. You wonder what time it is. The tavern has no clock. Time is measured in snores, in how low the fire burns, in how soon the rooster will crow. Outside, the rain has stopped. You can hear the soft drip of water from the eaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Inside, the tavern breathes, slow, steady, heavy with sleep and stew and stories. You close your eyes. The last thing you hear is someone whispering a lullaby about a boat, a goat, and a very foolish fisherman. And just like that, you're part of the room, part of the floor, part of the tavern. You wake with a snort and a mouth that tastes like barley soup left in the sun. The room is dim and foggy with early morning light pushing past the warped shutters. For a moment, you wonder where you are. Then you hear the goose. Right, the tavern. Your back protests as you sit up straw, clinging to your hair and cloak. A single boot is missing, and your sock is damp with something you'd rather not identify. Across the room, the monk is curled like a shrimp, still clutching his flask. The peddler is spooning his sack of wares, muttering about raisins. You stretch and take in the scene. It's a masterpiece of disarray, overturned benches, sticky tankards, half-eaten pies turned into makeshift pillows. One man snores into a bowl. Someone else is wrapped in a curtain that was definitely hanging last night. And the smell. It's not terrible exactly, but it's rich. A heady blend of stale ale sweat, damp straw burnt onions, and the faintest whiff of pickled eggs. You stand and nearly fall over. Your balance is not what it was. Neither is your dignity. The boy with the bucket is already making rounds, sloshing warm ale into empty mugs for those who stayed. It's called a hair of the hound in this part of the country, which sounds more poetic than it is. You accept a ladleful with a grunt of thanks and sip it slowly. It helps, barely. Maud stirs beside the hearth, groans, and opens one eye. Swamp brew again, she asks. You nod. Told you not to mix it with the Tuesday batch. You find your missing boot under the bench, wet chewed, slightly, but wearable, probably. The serving women are already resetting the room. Benches are uprighted, tables wiped with a cloth that has seen better centuries. Someone sweeps the though. Mostly it just rearranges the muck. Bertha moves among the debris like a general surveying the aftermath of a siege. A fresh pot steams over the fire, porridge or pottage, you can't tell. Either way, it's breakfast. You queue behind a shepherd missing several teeth and a cooper who smells strongly of vinegar. The bowl you're handed is thick, grayish, and possibly moving. You eat it anyway. Historians still argue whether medieval breakfasts were substantial or perfunctory. Most agree they were quick fuel rather than feast, especially in taverns where the day's business depended on how many chairs were still upright and how soon the hearth was hot again. You overhear a conversation about a lost cow, a broken cart axle, and someone's cousin who may or may not have been hexed. No one seems particularly alarmed. A man at the bar mutters to himself, counting out bent coins. 4 drinks, 1 stew a gamble, and 3 songs. 5 pence and half a chicken. Bertha nods. Chicken's in the back. He sighs. The monk finally wakes, stands, stretches, and announces that he has remembered all 7 sins, but refuses to repent until after second breakfast. You step outside briefly, blinking against the overcast sky. The village is waking. Smoke curls from chimneys. A rooster screams somewhere nearby. Mud squelches underfoot. You lean against the tavern's outer wall, sipping the last of your morning ale, and feel a strange sort of satisfaction. You're tired, sore, and slightly pickled, but somehow content. The tavern didn't kill you. That alone feels like a triumph. Inside, someone has started humming again. A gentle, wordless tune that echoes faintly out the door, trailing behind you like steam from a kettle. You take one last look at the warped sign above the door. The dancing pig and tankard now faint in the daylight, and smile. You'll be back. Maybe not soon, maybe never, but part of you will always be curled beneath that bench, dreaming of goose fights and sour ale. The tavern is quieter now. Not silent, never silent, but the kind of lull that follows a storm. Tables have been wiped down, mostly benches, re-straightened, and someone's finally managed to chase the goose outside, though it lingers by the door like a guest who forgot their hat. You remain in your seat, tankard emptied for the last time, watching the rhythm of the room as it exhales. This place, for all its noise, its mud, its questionable pies, isn't just a stop on the road. It is the road for many. It's where deals are struck with a handshake and a nod, where peddlers restock their tales before heading to the next town, where a runaway servant might find work, or a soldier might lose track of time, or 2 people destined to marry might first insult each other over spilled ale. You notice it now. The small ways the tavern holds its people together. A barmaid who slips an extra crust of bread to the stable boy, a carpenter mending a stool while waiting for his turn at the hearth, a brewer who knows every tankard's owner by the stains they leave behind. Historians sometimes overlook this part of medieval life. Great halls and battlefields make better headlines, but taverns were the real arenas, not of violence, but of laughter, survival, and slow-brewed human connection. You think of all that's happened here tonight, and on countless nights before the secrets traded over stew, the songs that never made it to parchment, the goose-related trauma. It's all part of the story, stitched into the smoky rafters and ground into the sticky rushes beneath your feet. Outside, the sky is lightening. Dawn is creeping in sideways, casting long shadows across the floor. The monk has gone. The peddler hums as he repacks his wares. Maud tosses you a final wink and a crust of bread before ducking out into the fog. You finish the last soggy corner of your breakfast and stand brushing crumbs from your cloak. One last glance around the fire, crackling softly, the serving girl singing to herself as she stacks bowls, the quiet weight of the place now settling back into its daily pulse. You step outside, boots squelching into the mud with renewed vigor. The road stretches ahead, damp and winding, but somehow lighter now. Behind you, the door creaks shut, and the tavern continues exactly as it should. Word count 1039. Wind down 300 words. So now, as you leave the warmth of the tavern behind, let the echoes of its laughter and clatter fade gently in your mind. Picture the embers softening to ash, the mugs stacked in leaning towers, and the last hum of a lullaby murmured by a sleepy bard beneath the bar. Feel the weight of your boots soften with each step into the misty road ahead, the chill on your cheeks now offset by the memory of warm bread, sour ale, and strangers who somehow felt like kin for just a few hours. Let the road stretch not as a burden, but as a quiet ribbon of time. Each footprint behind you, filled with straw and soot, and the ghosts of half-told stories. And maybe, just maybe, as you close your eyes tonight, you'll smell a hint of Groot in the air, or hear the faint pluck of a lute string still out of tune. You're no longer in the tavern, but the tavern, its warmth, its noise, its humanity travels with you now. Wherever you are, whoever you are, know that there's a bench by the hearth waiting for you, just down the lane, just past memory. Let the fire fade low. Let the clink of mugs drift away, and let your breath settle into the hush of sleep.